Okay, so we're on. A few minutes to go. It's light here. I just put another light on. Yeah, it looks a bit better. Greetings. Evening, Miroslav. We've got some real serious winter happening here right now. It was minus 32 Celsius this morning.
It's 6 o'clock.
Okay, let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today we're continuing our exploration of the Abhidhamma teachings. And last time we talked about chitta and the various ways of classifying chitta. Now, one of the ideas of how it works in Abhidhamma is that chitta arises momentarily to each object of consciousness, but it never arises by itself. It always has a set of associated states, a retinue, as it were, that arises with it. And these vary depending on the circumstances and the particular type of chitta. It will have a different array of associated states. And these associated states are the broad grouping Cetasika, which the Pali, the Cetasika means with chitta or associated with chitta. So the four fundamental categories in Abhidhamma, there's matter, citta, Cetasika, and Nibbàna. Citta and Cetasika are the two mental factors. So mind is seen as having these two aspects, which we could call very broadly, although it's maybe not exact, we could call it very broadly the subjective and objective aspects of mind. Citta is that which knows, the experiencing element, and the Cetasikas are all the processing that's required to actually have what we know as a moment of experience. In the Theravada list, there are 52 Cetasikas. This varies from other schools. This is one of the points in which the Abhidharmas of Sarvastivada, for example, differ from Theravada. It is in the exact list of the Cetasikas. But sticking with the Abhidhamma, the Theravadan Abhidhamma list, it was only, this list of 52 was only completed or closed in the commentarial period. In the canonical texts like the Dhammasangani, when there's a description of mental states arising associated with this or that citta, they'll use the phrase, at this time there arises these following states, and then I'll list them, A, B, C, D, E, and whatever other states may arise at that time. So sort of etc., leaving it open. When I first read the Suddhimagga many years ago, I wasn't aware of this, and there was a category in there they call the or whatever states. And I had no idea what this strange phrase meant, but it means those states that were added by the commentary to close the lists, so to speak. The commentators were very keen to cross all the T's and dot all the I's and fill in all the blanks. So that the list we have that you'll find in the Abhidhamma Sangaha and in the Suddhimagga is considered to be a closed list, is complete list, and it was closed or completed by the commentaries. So of these 52 states, relating them to the 5 khandha, the khandha of perception, sanya, is classed as one Cetasika, and the khandha of vedana, feeling, is classed as another, and all the remaining 50 are sankharas, according to the 5 khandha system. So this category of Cetasikas includes the 3 khandhas of sanya, vedana, sankhara that we find in the suttas. The Abhidhamma, of course, divides the pie and slices it differently. Instead of into 5 slices, it divides it into 4. So Cetasika is a rather broad category. Now there are different subgroupings within the Cetasikas. I probably won't go through every single one, but one of the most important groups are what are called the universals. There are 7 factors that occur with each moment of consciousness, irregardless whether it's a wholesome or unwholesome or neutral moment. These are always present with consciousness. And these are phassa, feeling, or as a contact, phassa, contact, vedana, feeling, sanya, perception, cetana, volition, ekaggata, one-pointedness, life faculty, and jivendriya, and attention, manasakara. So let's look at these a little bit. We've already mentioned that sanya and vedana are classed separately as their own khandas in the suttas. Perceptions, sanya, is very difficult in experience to separate from consciousness. Perception and consciousness are very intimately related. And the difference is this, that consciousness, or citta, or vijnana in the suttas, it knows only the bare experience. It doesn't know anything about it or recognize it in any way. So the example is given of visual consciousness. Visual consciousness doesn't see a tree or a table or a dog. Visual consciousness sees only color and shape. And it's the task of perception, sanya, to perceive those things, and it actually recognizes, formulates the idea of, in the mind, of a tree or a table or a dog. So sanya is very closely linked to memory and is educable. Your perception can be refined. Someone who's, for example, if there's a patch of ground with some rocks strewn around, ordinary person would just see a bunch of rocks, but someone who's been trained in geology would see schist and granite and whatever, would have a more acute perception of those objects. And perception works with the raw material from consciousness. So, for example, when we're dreaming at night, our perception is off the leash. It's not working with the immediate inputs of consciousness, so it just makes things up from fragments of memory and such, but it's still working. Vedana is the hedonic tone of every sense contact. So that is emotion at its most rudimentary level. That is pleasure, pain, and neutral. And every single contact with the mind, because this is a universal, Vedana arises with each moment of consciousness. Each moment is classified by this faculty as being either good, bad, or neutral, pleasant, painful, or neutral. This is something that happens automatically, and we don't have any control over it. And it's neither virtuous or the opposite to feel either pleasure or pain. They're resultant factors. They just arise. They're just given. Then we have a contact, phassa, which is the coming together of sense object, sense organ, and sense consciousness. And in the case of a mental object, then it's the mind sense. There was this is something that's of some interest in early Buddhism. This is one of the controverted points, that some of the schools didn't list phassa as a separate category, as a separate Cetasika. They said it's only the conjunction of these three. It's just a name given when these three arise together. But in the Theravada, it's listed as a separate dhamma, that there is this occurrence that's caused by the coming together of sense object, sense organ, and sense consciousness. Now, the volition, cetana, is something like will, but it's more basic because it occurs in each moment of consciousness. So obviously, not every moment of consciousness is what we would call willed or volitional in the common understanding of that. We don't. We do have in Abhidhamma the classification between volitional moments and resultant moments, but even the resultant moments have cetana involved, which is a kind of intention at a very simple level at that time. It's not really making an effect, but there is this kind of will present in each moment of consciousness. Life faculty. Abhidhamma recognizes two varieties of life faculty. There's mental life faculty and physical life faculty. This is the vital principle, this that animates and gives life to the organism. It separates animate from inanimate objects. So this is a refinement in Abhidhamma when the classification of sentient beings are those that have consciousness and life faculty. Plants are considered to have, they're called one faculty beings. They're considered to have life faculty only, but not consciousness. The one-pointedness, ekagata, or in some versions of the list is given even as samadhi. This is the obviously when it's fully developed, it's a jhana factor, and but this is at a very simple level here as a universal, and this is because every moment of consciousness only takes one object. So this is actually something pretty important to understand about the Abhidhamma view of the mind, is that at any given single moment, it's only taking one object. So you don't see and hear, for example, in a single moment. Our ordinary experience, we think like you're watching the screen, you're seeing me and you're hearing me talk. So you think you're seeing and hearing at once, but actually you're switching back and forth very quickly between eye consciousness and ear consciousness. In any given moment, singled out, it's only doing one or the other. So at each single moment, there is this moment of one-pointedness or samadhi. Where it's different in terms of meditative development is that we strive to maintain a continuous series of mind moments on a single object. And then samadhi takes on a more profound meaning. It's the mind is not moving. But in any case, whatever we're doing, no matter how distracted or confused we are, if you look at only a single mind moment, there's samadhi on an object, because it's only taking one object. And the last universal is manisakara, which is attention. And this can be considered in some ways it's like a weak form of sati or mindfulness. Manisakara is just the directing of the mind towards an object. And that's present in each moment of consciousness. This is the mental factor that pulls all the other factors towards the given object. So those 7 factors are present in each moment of consciousness. Then there are additional factors that arise, and I'm referring to this to Bhikkhu Bodhi for this list because I won't remember all these details, and I don't want to get mixed up. There are unwholesome factors and what are called beautiful factors, sobana. And the reason that they're called beautiful rather than kusala here is because it's broader than kusala. Kusala is skillful, and when we speak about a volitional action, the Pali is, whether it's like a good or bad action, the Pali is kusala akusala, which means skillful or unskillful, which I think is a very neat way of expressing that. You're either skillful in making karma or you're unskillful. So it takes kind of the heavy-handed morality of good and evil out of the picture, and it's just like, are you being skillful with your actions or unskillful? And the results that are received in vipaka are pleasant or unpleasant. And the factor of Subbana also is called beautiful factors, to include kusala, but it also includes the pleasant resultant factors. So let's deal with the unwholesome factors first. And there are 4 unwholesome universals that arise with each akusala moment of consciousness. So every bad karma moment that we're making bad karma, we're doing something wrong, it is associated with delusion, shamelessness, fear of wrong, and restlessness. A delusion is a moha. That's one of the 3 roots. There's moha, lopa, and dosa. And these are present in unwholesome states of consciousness. Dosa is present in all unwholesome states of consciousness. Dosa and lopa, that is attachment and aversion, or greed and hatred, however you want to translate it, those 2 are opposite. So they never occur together. So that they're not universals. They're not unwholesome universals, because you can't have both in one moment. You're either being greedy or you're being hateful, but not both. But whenever you're being unskillful, you're always deluded. And there are some unwholesome moments that are primarily motivated by delusion, and the other 2 then are not present. Delusion, moha, is seeing wrongly, not understanding. It's the same as avijja, ignorance. What's translated here as shamelessness and fearlessness of wrong are ahiri and anatopa. They're the opposites of hiri and atopa, which are commonly translated as shame and moral dread, hiri and ottappa. I've never liked this translation, shame and moral dread, because I think it's very off-putting, and it's doesn't quite actually catch the meaning as it's defined. Hiri is, and the 2 together they always go together, hiri and ottappa. These are the positive, the good qualities, and the lack of them are the negative qualities, or the opposite. But hiri and ottappa always go together, and they're called the guardians of the world, the lokapalas, because when they're not present in humankind, it descends into a shameless, barbaric state. It's to keep a decent society functioning, you have to have hiri and ottappa. And we need it in our own lives to lead a moral, decent life. And hiri is, it's called shame because it's the sense of having respect for yourself. Like, you wouldn't do something that's evil or gross because you have respect for yourself. You don't, you would be ashamed to do such a thing. And ottappa is, so that's internally focused. Ottappa is externally focused. It's a concern of consequences, or knowledge or fear of consequences. And that includes karmic consequences, and also the censure of the wise, and what other beings might say, or how they may be impacted. So that keeps beings behaving morally if they have hiri and ottappa. And in every moment of unskillful karma, the opposite states are present, ahiri and anuttapa, which means lack of shame and lack of moral dread. Or I prefer to translate them as respect for self and respect for others. And the last one is restlessness, uddhacca, present in every moment of unskillful consciousness. Uddhacca is also occurs in the list of the 5 nivaranas, the hindrances that obstruct meditation. Uddhacca is the restlessness of mind. It's the agitation of mind. And this is a very deeply rooted defilement because it's only overcome by the arahant. Even the anagami, 3rd stage of enlightenment, is subject to bouts of restlessness. It's the inability of the mind to rest, to be content in the present moment. And although it's a universal, unwholesome universal, meaning it's present in every unskillful state of mind, there are times when it dominates, but it's always present, at least to some degree. Then there are the unwholesome occasionals. These occur in some unwholesome states, but not in others, because some of them are mutually exclusive. So they're not necessary for every single state. And I'll just go through the list quickly here in the English. Greed, wrong view, conceit, hatred, envy, avarice, worry, sloth, torpor, and doubt. So greed is lobha. That is one of the roots. And it's interesting. One of the interesting little details in Abhidhamma that you get insights into the nature of mind by looking at how these states relate to each other, which ones can exist together. And a wrong view, ditthi, and this is sort of counterintuitive when you first hear it, but ditthi only occurs in a mind dominated by greed, by lobha. It doesn't arise in a mind dominated by hatred or dosa. Now that does seem counterintuitive at first, because you can easily think of wrong views that lead to hatred. But that's because that's the way, that's the order of procedure here. The wrong view arises first and it engenders hatred. At the moment when hatred is present in the mind, it's too emotive a state for views to be present. Views require a certain intellectual engagement, even wrong views. And greed arises because the mind is grasping at some conception of reality. In the Paticca Samuppada, we have, because of tanha, craving, we have upadana, clinging. And one of the forms of clinging is clinging to views. And this is a very pernicious kind of clinging. People get very attached to their views, and it causes a lot of trouble in the world because people are so convinced their views are correct or righteous. And this comes from greed. It comes from wanting this to be true or wanting the world to be this way. So lobha is the basis of views. Delusion, dosa, as I said, is a universal, but it has, when it's the dominant state, it has 2 forms in the mind, either restlessness or conceit. And these are also 2 different types of confusion. sloth and torpor, tinamida, they're two states that are always associated together. And they are also one of the, together as a pair, they're one of the 5 hindrances also, obstructions to meditation. And if you'll recall from the talk on consciousness, that one of the classifications of consciousness is between prompted and unprompted, sankata and asankata. And tinamida, sloth and torpor, are always considered to arise with prompted consciousness. That the prompting doesn't mean that it necessarily comes from outside. Someone doesn't have to come and tell you to, oh yeah, just be lazy. You, but you have some external factor. There might be even like bodily tiredness could be the prompt to allow the mind to sink into sloth and torpor. The reason it's never unprompted is because unprompted means that it's completely spontaneous. So beings never decide, oh, I'm going to just sink into sloth and torpor. It's not like, without thinking about it. If you thought about it and decided I'm going to give into sloth and torpor, then that makes it prompted. But you don't just have the spontaneous movement of mind into that. So that's there's more that could be said about these states, but I'm trying to keep it within a reasonable amount of time. So we'll move on to the beautiful factors, and this is a longer list. There are more beautiful factors, Nibbàna Cetasikas, than there are akusala Cetasikas, which is maybe significant. And there's a long list of beautiful universals. There's 19 beautiful universals. These are states of mind that are factors of mind that arise with each skillful moment of consciousness and also with resultants. So these are faith, mindfulness, shame, fear of wrong, non-greed, non-hatred, neutrality of mind. And then there's a set of pairs: tranquility of mental body, tranquility of consciousness, lightness of mental body and consciousness, malleability of mental body and consciousness, wieldiness of mental body and consciousness, proficiency of mental body and consciousness, and rectitude of mental body and consciousness. So faith, saddha, is the first in the list, and that's present in every wholesome state of consciousness. So it means something more fundamental and basic than any particular highly developed or directed kind of faith, which saddha, it is more mature. Saddha also comes up in other lists as an indriya, as a faculty, and as a bala, a power. But that's when it's been matured and strong, and it has gravity to it, and it has a content to it. But saddha, in the most primitive form, is arising in every wholesome moment. It's just like a positive outlook. There's a confidence. Confidence is probably a better word than faith for translating it. Mindfulness, sati, is of course a very important factor, concept in Buddhism. It is the foundation of, or one of the foundations of meditation. It's one of the Eightfold Path factors. And we have the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 bases of mindfulness. Sati is something that needs to be defined. So I think very often it's misunderstood. Some of the older translations, like the early PTS translations, they translated sati as recollectedness, which is a sort of an awkward tongue breaker of a word, but it's maybe closer to the actual original meaning of sati than mindfulness. In a mundane use of sati, particularly maybe not so much in, well, to some degree in Pali, but in Sanskrit, is smriti is used for memory. So memory is called smriti, which is the Sanskrit form of sati. And even in the Pali, there's a phrase that occurs in the suttas sometimes when a particular individual is said to be very mindful. It will be said of him, so-and-so is satimant, meaning has sati or strong sati. So-and-so is satimant. He easily remembers things that were done and said long ago. So there's a link to memory there. And we'll probably get back to this point next time when we talk about the cognitive series, because when the mind is mindful, it registers the content. So there is this connection. Like people have got the idea that sati means present moment consciousness, and that's true in a sense. But when you have present moment consciousness fully on an object, then it's registered, it's put away in memory. And sati has another aspect related to memory in that it can be understood as remembering to be present. So it's a collectedness of mind. So you're present in the present moment because you remember that's where you are and what you're doing. And then hiri and ottappa we already talked about. That is common translation is shame and moral dread. These are the guardians of the world. Non-greed and non-hatred, that is alobha and adosa. Alobha is also specifically said that that's a synonym for metta. Or I'm not sorry, adosa, non-hatred. Adosa is a synonym for metta, loving kindness. But the Abhidhamma prefers to use the negative form for these positive qualities. And I speculate that this is, at least in part, it's because the positive quality is actually more basic. So when ill will is not present, love naturally arises because it's more fundamental to the mind. So we can call a state of loving kindness, we can call it simply non-hatred. And likewise for alobha is non-greed. It's renunciation or non-grasping. Neutrality of mind is tatramajjhatata, which is also a form of upekkha. In some contexts, it's synonymous with upekkha. Upekkha it must be distinguished that there are two forms of upekkha. There is upekkha as a sankhara and upekkha as a vedana. Upekkha is also used to refer to neutral feeling. So that's simply on the level of vedana. But upekkha as a mental formation is the neutrality of mind, it's a higher level. It's not just having a neutral feeling, although neutral feeling is the feeling tone associated with this mind state. It is the non-judgmental attitude, the centeredness. And this was tatramajjhatata is used here is literally translated. If you break the word down, it literally means being in the middle about that. The tatra part is that. And why that's there is because it's pointing to a specific object. So it's not just a general fuzzy neutrality. It's like this moment of consciousness right here, right now, I'm neutral about it. I'm in the middle. And that's a very important quality for developing vipassana. Tatra Majjhatthata. Then we have this long list of the pairs that are divided into mental body and consciousness. Mental body is another word for Cetasikas. Kaya is a word for body, and it usually refers to the physical body, but in Abhidhamma it's often used to refer to the mental body, that is the rest of the mind other than citta, or synonymous with Cetasika. So most of these factors are very close to each other. They refer to the malleability, the wieldiness, the proficiency of mind. So they're all relating to the workability of mind. That mind at that time is pliant and adaptable and useful. It's not stiff and resistant. Then there's a few, there's some shorter lists that are sort of miscellaneous beautiful factors, Sobhana Cetasikas. One of them, they're called the abstinences, and they're right. That's right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So 3 of the path factors. And then the illimitables, compassion and appreciative joy, which are 2 of the Brahma Viharas, compassion and sympathetic joy, karuna and mudita. It may be that the commentators added these lists as part of their closing the book, so to speak, because the other path factors and the other Brahma Viharas are included elsewhere under different names, or at least closely related factors. We already have sati and samadhi under the form of Tatra Majjhatthata. Or actually under Ekagata. So we have the Eightfold Path in one form or another is already present. And likewise with the Brahma Viharas, we have Alopa, or sorry, I keep doing that, is Adosa. Adosa is metta, and Upekkha is already present as a factor, as under Tatra Majjhatthata. So these 2 lists, the absences and the illimitables, close off the list of Cetasikas to include the whole of the Eightfold Path and the whole of the 4 Brahma Viharas. And then there's one single factor, non-delusion, wisdom faculty, adosa, which is said to be, or amoha. These negatives kind of confuse me. Some moha around these negatives, which end up being sort of double negatives in my mind. But amoha is said to be the synonymous with panya, wisdom. So that's not present in every wholesome moment. Not every skillful moment is based on wisdom, but it can, when it's present, it's always associated with wholesome states of mind, not otherwise. Wisdom is defined as seeing things according to reality, understanding things according to as they actually are, and not otherwise, not being deluded about reality. And it's particularly For example, seeing the three characteristics of not self, suffering, and impermanence. Seeing in that way is wisdom, panya, or in the Abhidhamma terminology, amoha. Then there's one more set of Cetasikas, this fairly short set, that are called the occasionals. They can occur with either skillful or unskillful states of mind, but they're different from the universals in that they don't necessarily occur in every moment, but they can be associated with various states of mind. These are Vitakka and Vichara, initial and sustained application of mind, which are jhana factors, but they also relate to thought and speech. Decision, adhimokkha, or resolution is another translation, like termination of mind. Energy, virya, zest, piti, and chanda, which is one of the words for desire. Now, chanda is a different than tanha, which is also translated as desire. Tanha is the word that occurs in the formula of the Four Noble Truths. When we say that suffering is caused by desire, it's tanha that we're talking about. And tanha has a very specific referent. It's desire, and it's more literally thirst, but it's desire for sense pleasure, for being and for non-being, those three kinds. That's tanha. Chanda is a more general, and chanda has no particular moral quality, good or bad, on its own. It depends on its object. So there is chanda for sense desire objects that then it becomes the same as tanha. But there's also dhamma chanda, which is desire for understanding and practicing dhamma and realizing liberation, and that's a positive. So chanda is classed as morally ambiguous, depending on its object, and it's a broader meaning of a broader range of meaning than tanha. So this points to something that comes up quite a bit, is misunderstandings of the teachings based on translation. And if you just take the Four Noble Truths translation as suffering is caused by desire and abandon all desire, sometimes people think that one of the objections you hear to Buddhism from outsiders is that Buddhism would just, if you follow that advice, it just turns you into a kind of potato. You just become a vegetable because you have no desire to do anything or move. But that's misunderstanding based on mistranslation, because we're talking about very specific desires. Obviously, the Buddha and the Arahants, they're active in the world. Their chanda can arise in their mind when the Buddha is seeking to liberate sentient beings with his teaching. He's full of compassion, and he has a chanda for their liberation. So he has a desire in that sense for their liberation. But sensual desire, or the desire to be or to not to be, would not arise in his consciousness. So that's a quick tour of the Cetasikas. It's and a couple of things to say about it, just general comments at the end here. One is that, as I said, this list is different in other Abhidharmas outside the Theravada. This is one of the points you'll find, although it's not that different, but there you'll find it's kind of an interesting study to look at the Sarvastivadin list, for example. Or if you pick up a book on Tibetan Abhidharma, which I think it comes there, Abhidharma comes mostly from Mula Sarvastivada. You'll see a different list. There'll be some overlap, but a different list. And I'd also give another recommendation for reading. If you want to read a really approachable book on that's specifically on the Cetasikas, there's a book called Cetasikas by Nina van Gorken. Nina van Gorken wrote several books on Abhidhamma. She is was a Dutch woman. I don't know if she's passed on now or not. She'd be quite old if she's still alive. I'm not sure. But she's a Dutch woman who lived in Thailand for many years and kind of went native. And she studied Buddhism extensively and took a particular interest in Abhidhamma. And her book on Cetasikas, I find it particularly good. It's a medium-sized sort of book, and it's just on the Cetasikas. It goes through the entire list of 52 and has a write-up on each one. So, and it's very easily approachable. It's not a difficult book to read. So I'll put that her name in the chat, so you can look for her book if you're interested. Okay, I'm going to stop now, and let's turn over to the chat now. Maybe if you try and hold your questions back for a moment or two, because I see there's already several here to deal with. That I like I said before, I deliberately try not to look at the chat when I'm speaking, because if I start to read the chat, I lose my train of thought. Okay, let's see. First question here. Do you think Buddhaghosa analogy of the stick regarding Hiriyottapa is useful or too harsh? Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it is kind of like that. It's like you have Hiriyottapa, you're sort of restrained in your behavior because you don't want to be punished by yourself with shame or by the outside universe by bad karma. So you keep you avoid the stick by having Hiriyottapa. Let's see, next question. In my psychotherapy days, we were taught the fear of outer consequences was an earlier form of development than inner respect for one's virtue. Yeah, I don't know if one's I don't know in Buddhist or Abhidhamma terms whether one precedes the other. They always seem to come together as a pair. You never really hear of Hiri and Ottapa separately. Let's see. Donovan's Abhidhamma is first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is, laugh out loud. I'm not sure what to make of that. I don't know who Donovan is. First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. That sounds more like Zen than Abhidhamma. Bhante, could you speak a bit more about attention in regard to not willing what in regard to not willing what draws it to a certain object, etc. Thank you. Yeah, that's a pretty good question. We're talking about manasakara, attention, which is a separate factor from cetana, which is intention. That I guess you could say in a broader meaning of the word intentional or volitional, manasakara is that kind of volitional aspect of the mind of turning to an object, sort of deciding which object to pay attention to, and that choice will be guided by previous karma, and it'll be limited by previous karma. There's only a limited array of objects that the mind could attend to at any given moment. And Sankara is that factor which makes that choice, that guides all the other mental factors onto that object. I feel that the Buddha didn't teach Abhidhamma. I feel that it is good and helpful, but I prefer the suttas. Yeah, many people do prefer the suttas. Whether the Buddha taught Abhidhamma or not is probably historically, he probably didn't teach the Abhidhamma that we have in the form that we have, but you can find the Abhidhamma principles in the suttas, particularly in the Samyutta Nikaya, that the Abhidhamma seems to be an elaboration of many of the principles that we find in the suttas. Of course, I said in my very first lecture about the basis of Abhidhamma that the traditional story is that the Buddha taught the Abhidhamma to the Devas and Tawatinks of heaven, and he came down every day for alms round. He gave a brief synopsis to Sariputta, and the Sariputta was credited with putting it into a form that to teach others. This is the Abhidhamma that we have. And there's a lot of details in that story. It's a very beautiful, colorful story, but I think we have to be careful about not taking it literally. And one of the reasons I can say that is that we do have some Abhidhamma texts and fragments surviving from other schools, and they seem to be quite different in layout and formulation and some degree in content, although not in underlying principles so much. So my kind of hypothesis about the nature of Abhidhamma, that it was developed very early after the Buddha, and it was, for each different school of Buddhism, it was sort of like took the role of a manifesto. It was like to express my school or our school, how we understand things. This is how we interpret the suttas. This is how we fill in the blanks. And maybe you guys over there, you got a different approach, but this is how we understand it. I think that was really the service of Abhidhamma in the early days. Let's see. Donovan, you remember, was a popular 1960s pop singer from the UK. He wrote that line from Zen. You're right. Okay. No, I don't really remember Donovan. But like they say, if you remember the 60s, you weren't really there. But actually, I was just a kid in the 60s. The truth is. Greetings, Bhante. Is Upekkha Tattramajjhana in the beautiful factors same as Upekkha in the fourth jhana? No, it's not. It's related, but Tattramajjhana is a Cetasika as is a Sankara. It's a mental formation. Whereas Upekkha in the fourth jhana is a very refined feeling tone. It's Vedana, but at a very refined level, where the neutral feeling becomes a profound peacefulness. So it's not exactly the same thing. Okay, next one. I had dinner with Professor Warder in Toronto in 2001, and he showed that with the linguistics, it was about 200 years after the Buddha, the Abhidhamma was composed. Yeah, I would probably not want to contradict A.K. Warder on the linguistics, and that time frame sounds to me realistic. But that would also, when we say it was composed 200 years after the Buddha, there could have been in the intervening period, it was probably in development. My understanding of our moment-to-moment unconscious volitions are due to our habit energy, that the need to wake up to our habits, make the effort to change the unskillful ones. Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. There's a habitual process in the mind that we get stuck in ruts in the mind. We develop habits, and we just continue on doing the same thing because it's very easy. There's no resistance. Ajahn Chah told a story that to illustrate this. He says it's like a man riding an ox cart, and the old style ox carts in Thailand, they had big wheels with a narrow rim, and the water buffalo would pull this cart. And if you were going from one village to another where there was a lot of traffic, the carts would have dug ruts in the mud, and you could fall asleep in the cart, and the water buffalo would pull the cart even around corners to take the path of least resistance by just keeping the thing in the ruts. But if you wanted to go to another location that gets a lot less traffic, somewhere unusual or new, you would have to put in a lot of effort. You'd have to stop the cart, get out of the cart, unhook the water buffalo, wrestle the cart out of the ruts, then chase the water buffalo down, which run off along the field, and drag him back, hook him up, and stay awake to make sure he goes in the right direction. And he said that's like, the amount of willpower and cetana you need to muster up, an energy, virya, you need to muster up to correct bad habits or any habits you have to wrestle that cart out of the ruts. But you can also use this, another aspect of this is that you can also use habit formation to your benefit. You can develop wholesome habits. Like one of the most important things about daily practice of meditation is its consistency. If you just make a habit of meditating every day at the same time, whether you want to or not, after some time it just becomes a daily habit, and you just do it without any resistance in the mind. And that's using the habit mind to your advantage. Can you explain calling the Abhidhamma high church Buddhism? I think you referred to it like that once and wondered if you could elaborate. Yeah, that's kind of my jocular label. High church is it's a term borrowed from Christianity, and particularly British Christianity. The Anglican Church has a high church and a low church, and the high church is like the official church, and
it's 7 o'clock.
Theologically and dogmatically correct, and the other ones are the sort of half-educated heretics, sort of snobbish attitude. So I sometimes refer to that in terms of Theravada, what I call high church Theravada, which is my own label. It's meant sort of humorously, not to be taken too serious. What I call high church Theravada is Theravada that follows the Visuddhimagga, the commentaries, and the Abhidhamma. And the low church Theravada is more like the forest tradition, based on experience and meditation, and they're not too concerned if something that they speak from their own heart and experience. They're not concerned that it may be a little different than what you'll find in the Abhidhamma or in the Visuddhimagga. Is taking delight in the senses a form of obsession with avijja? Not really. I think that's, avijja must be must be present. Avijja is ignorance. It must be present in the mind, but it's more, the more predominant root there is lobha, or desire or greed. Ajahn, Yoniso Manasikara seems to be more than attentiveness. Doesn't feel like investigation, but perhaps seeing deeply, which brings in panya. Yoniso Manasikara is a right or skillful reflection. It's the way the mind processes thoughts and sense experience and objects can be either yoniso or ayoniso. Yoniso, in the deepest sense, means that understanding things in terms of emptiness. But in general, it means like seeing things according to dhamma, seeing things according to the teaching. Ayoniso is seeing things in samsaric terms. So attaching to pleasant experience, or seeing things as secure and lasting, and reflecting in that way. But skillful reflection, yoniso manasikara, is seeing things according to dhamma. Okay, it seems like the chat has slowed down here, so if there's no last questions, we'll call it for this session. And next time I want to do the cognitive series, which is an interesting and a little bit complex aspect. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the phrase appears several times about ever returning from that world. When the Buddha talked about Nibbàna, does that mean Nibbàna is an actual place or world? No. I'd have to see the context, but I suspect he's talking about the anagami, who goes to, which means non-returner, third stage of enlightenment. So they're reborn in the Pure Land, and so they never return from that world. They attain Nibbàna from there. The Buddha certainly would not be referring to Nibbàna as a place or a world. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I'll take my leave, and thank you all for attending, and we'll see you again in a week's time.